The worst thing to do is get so caught up in procedure and paperwork that you allow a client to hurt themselves or someone else, right? I'll also say several times today, stay calm in crisis. Okay? When you're in crisis, meaning the client's not thinking straight and maybe acting strangely in their behavior, the last thing you want to do is to be anxious and upset. You want to be a calming influence on the client. Okay? When in doubt, if you don't know what to do with a client, ask for help. No one case is the same. I've had to deal with a lot of different suicidal cases over the years. None of them are the same, and they may not fit perfectly into what you'll learn today. Always ask for help if you're not sure what to do, and that's okay. Based on what you've heard up to this point in your training, who at night would you ask for help from? Good. On-call supervisor or the night supervisor. I think every facility has a nighttime supervisor. So one or both you want to talk to. Okay. Suicide statistics. What do we know about suicide? Elderly men have the highest rates of suicide. Did you know that?
No.
Why would that be?
Maybe because they lose their independence.
They lose their independence. Think about it. As you age, what happens?
You go back to being a kid.
You go back to almost being dependent on people, don't you? And that's very hard. I'll never forget my grandfather, God bless him. He died at 103. When he had his 100th birthday, I'll never forget it. I was sitting there with him. We had this big cake. The few friends were in the room that he still had left. Most had died. And I said, Grandpa, you've had a wonderful life. You must be proud. And he just looked at me and he said, Randy, my life sucks. Now, why did he say that? Well, because he'd lost most of the people close to him. He'd lost his wife 25 years before he ended up dying. He had lost one son already. And so his life wasn't as merry. As you know, we think old age is great, but not necessarily. Right? So, how do elderly men kill themselves? Probably pills. Think about it. Your grandparents, they have enough pills in their cabinet to wipe out a bunch of people. Right? And themselves if they choose. So that's usually how they do it. Just take too many pills and go to sleep. Caucasians have higher rates than African Americans. And don't ask me why that statistic is true, but they've got evidence to support that. Past classes have posed the question, maybe it's because the black cultures had to be resilient through the years and had to learn how to deal with very stressful situations, so their suicide rates are less. That's just a guess. But Caucasians seem to have higher rates. Women attempt more often, men complete more often. To realize that. Men, we complete more often because we're macho. How do men kill themselves? Guns or jumping from high places. Very successful ways to do it. But women seem to try it more often as cries for help. All right, yearly 30,000 people in the United States die by suicide. That's quite a few.
That's a lot.
But over 500,000 go to emergency rooms to get treated a year. So a lot of people don't end up dying, but they need emergency treatment and care. Over the last 100 years in this country, suicides outnumbered homicides 3-2. So there's many more suicides than homicides in this country. Why don't we hear about suicide more often?
It's not news.
I'm sorry?
It's not news.
Well, it is news to those families that have lost someone.
But it's not news to what they consider be for us to know about.
Well, right. There is a stigma in this country where there's a shame attached to suicide. Kind of like there was to homosexuality 20 years ago. But that's changing. But it's still a taboo in this country. So we've got to educate people and make people realize that we need to talk about suicide and get some answers before it's too late for folks. Okay? Prediction. No one can accurately predict suicide. I wish as a psychologist I had a good test that could tell me who's going to kill themselves and who's not going to. All we know is risk management. I can tell you how many factors someone has that they could potentially hurt themselves with, but I can't tell you who's going to do it and who isn't. So the best prevention in suicide is to know your client. The more you know about them, the more you're going to be able to tell if something's wrong. All right? Depression is a disease. Depression is highly linked with suicide. However, if I'm highly suicidal, I will not probably kill myself. Huh? Did you just contradict yourself, Dr. Shively? What do you think? No, actually, both statements I just said are true. How can that be? Suicide's highly associated with depression, but if you're highly depressed, you don't usually kill yourself. You know? Well, it's because when you're in a high depressive state, your body's too shut down and you don't have enough energy to take your life. So when do people try to kill themselves? When they're coming out of the depression and feeling better. They still have the suicidal thoughts up there. That's when they take their life. That makes sense?
Yeah.
But it's associated with depression, but when you're in a highly depressed state, you don't normally have the energy it would take to harm yourself that badly. What are the major depressive symptoms? You need to know these. SIG caps. I'll go through them. S, sleep. Somebody majorly depressed will sleep more or less than usual for them. What's usual? You got to know your client, once again. I, interest. Somebody with major depression will report having few interests. Things they used to love to do no longer excite them anymore. G, guilt. Somebody majorly depressed will report feeling guilty. Everything's their fault. They may feel guilty about feeling guilty. Okay? E, energy. Somebody majorly depressed will report feeling like a limp rag. They have no energy. They drag throughout the day. Their shoulders are heavy. C, concentration. Somebody majorly depressed will report having a hard time focusing for any length of time. They can't concentrate. A, appetite. Somebody majorly depressed will report having more of an appetite than usual or less than an appetite than usual. How do you know? You have to know your client once again. I'll tell you a story. One client I treated, a middle-aged woman, when she would get depressed, she would go to Kroger's and buy 2 big bags of double-stuffed Oreos. You know, 200 calories in a cookie. And she'd eat both bags in one sitting.
Ooh.
Then she'd throw them all up. And that was her ritual when she felt depressed. And I know a lot of people eat more when they're depressed or feeling down. P, psychomotor or motor skills. What happens to somebody's motor skills when they're depressed?
Slower.
They slow way down. Good. So they walk slower. They usually have a shuffled gait. Right? So they're moving slow. Where's their head?
Down.
Down. And they feel like they have like a sack of potatoes on their back. They walk like this, very slowly. And they talk very slowly. Okay? So everything starts shutting down. And then finally, S, suicidal thoughts. Somebody majorly depressed will report having thoughts of hurting themselves. Now, how do we know if those thoughts are going to lead towards suicide? One indicator is the more detail somebody can give you when they talk about hurting themselves. The more detail they give you, the more the risk. If you ask me if I'm suicidal and I tell you yes, and you ask me, well, how are you going to do it? And I say, well, I don't know. Maybe shoot myself. Well, do you own a gun? No. Do you know anybody that owns a gun? No. When will you do it? I don't know. Very little detail. So my risk is a lot less than somebody that can tell you where they're going to get their gun, how they're going to do it, etc. So, major depression. Sleep, more or less interest, lower interest. G, guilt. E, energy. C, concentration. A, appetite. P, psychomotor or motor skills, slow down. And S, suicidal thinking. The more of those traits a client has, the more chance they have to be suicidal. Now we've got to talk about something called imminent risk. The imminent risk are if these traits are present, they have more of a chance of hurting themselves. These are factors we have to manage. First of all, recent attempt. If the person has had a recent attempt, they have more of a chance of doing it again or trying it again. Second, express threats. Take every threat seriously. If I say I'm going to kill myself, take it seriously. Maybe I'm the type to just be trying to gain attention. A lot of our clients are that way. But guess what? Our clients are huge risk takers, and they can kill themselves just trying to get attention. So you got to take it seriously. You'll learn the policy later. If they're just trying to get attention, there's enough negative in the policy by things that they're restricted from that they probably won't do that again. But we want clients, if they need help, we never want to have a suicide on our hands that we could have prevented. And knock on wood, this isn't wood, but I'll knock on it anyway. I've been here over 25 years and we've never had a successful completer. That doesn't mean tomorrow it couldn't happen. For example, one day in one of the women's facilities about 9 years ago, we had 3 people threatening at the same time. Copycat in one facility. Those staff that were working that day had quite a crazy time, didn't they? All right, plan and preparation. I already mentioned that. The more detailed the plan, the more the risk. AOD issues, alcohol or drug. If somebody comes in and they're still addicted or withdrawing from a chemical, they have more risk to hurt themselves. Mental status. This is a term we use in psychology, but it's basically looking at psychological things of the person like concentration, comprehension, attention, etc. But if the mental status has some significant changes, such as somebody's depressed, they feel hopeless, they're impulsive in their behaviors, and they're very agitated, that's a bad combo. Those are all high-risk factors. All right, so these are all imminent risk things we need to pay attention to. Getting help is critical. I love this quote. Suicide is a permanent end to a temporary problem. If you get help when you need it, within this window, you're probably going to be okay. If we can't get you help within that window, it may be too late. And guess what? Nobody's ever come back to do it again. Once you're gone, right? All right, so we've talked about imminent risk factors. Question? Nope. Any questions before we move on?
Yeah, can you just repeat those sigma? SI?
Interest, skill, energy, concentration.
I got it.
You got it?
Yeah.
Okay. No questions?
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
What would be some, in these facilities, you're gonna have a lot of people who are really down, like,
Yep.
with cause. So how do you tell the difference between that and someone who's like depressed, like dangerous?
You're going to
level
go in,
depressed?
you will, couple answers to that. If you feel like there's something really wrong with someone, or could be, get the clinician in your facility involved. You should have a clinician there. They can take and do a quick evaluation of that person. Second, if you don't have a clinician available, have a discussion. You'll have some idea of some of the questions you could ask by the end of my presentation.
Yeah.
Have a one-on-one talk with that person in private. Not in front of others, but you might find out, are they really serious about this, or is it just that they're having some adjustment issues? Because it's normal to come from prison and come to Alvis and be kind of down, right? You got released, you want your independence back. You're not going to get it for a while. And you still got things you got to do to complete to make it back out in the community. So some folks are down and a little scared when they come to us. That's normal. But yeah, you want to probably involve the clinician if you really are concerned that they might hurt themselves. Okay. Hope I answered your question okay there.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Okay. Protective factors. These factors, if they're present, lessen the chance of somebody hurting themselves. Access to means. If I don't have easy access to a way to hurt myself, obviously my risk goes down, doesn't it? So if they have availability versus not having availability. Will to live. If I still have a will to live, even if I'm thinking suicidal thoughts, that's a protective factor. Like, I'm not going to kill myself because my kids need me, or my wife needs me, or maybe my job needs me, right? I'm less likely to take my life. Social and family supports. If I got people to call and go to when I'm real down, that lessens my risk. That makes common sense, right? Treatment relationship. If I have a counselor or somebody that I've been in treatment with in the past I can go to or call, my risk goes down. Most people that kill themselves, it's a last attempt ditch. They've tried everything and nothing's working for them. So maybe that's a great question to ask the group. Why do you think people kill themselves? What's going on in their head when they take their life? There's depression, but what's their thought process
They
like?
have nothing else to live for.
Right. They decide they have nothing else to live for. They've tried everything, and most of them will tell you they're in pain. And they've tried everything for the pain to stop, but it won't stop. So their only solution they can think of is to take their life. Now, if we could find another way and help them and get their pain to stop or slow down, they'd have reasons to live. But in that moment, they have no reason they can think to live. In fact, I've dealt with several suicidal ladies that have come back and told me, I just wanted the pain to end, but I couldn't find a way for it to end. I tried everything. So the next common sense solution was take my life. For us, it sounds like a crazy idea, right? But if you're in that place, you're not thinking straight. If anybody in here's ever been real depressed over anything, you're not in a place where you're thinking normally, right? And that's unfortunately when things can happen. And then cultural beliefs, that's a protective factor. Some religions and faiths do not believe in suicide. For example, Catholics, they believe in a purgatory, and what do they believe happens if you take your life? That's where you go, right? So, and other beliefs, other faiths have similar beliefs. Suicide's not an option. So that's protective. Other thing, life satisfaction, as I mentioned earlier. If there's some area in your life you're satisfied with, that's a protective factor. Religiousness. If I have faith in a God, a supreme being, somebody that can help me and protect me, I can pray to, that lessens my risk. That makes common sense. Coping skills. If I can cope some with my life in some areas, that's a protective factor. Right? Because I have some way to deal with my depressed thinking or my suicidal thoughts. Reality testing. That means if I'm in touch with what's happening around me, I have less chance to kill myself. Some people don't have touch with reality. They may be psychotic. They may be hearing voices or seeing things or thinking things that are delusional, that aren't really happening. Those people are at a higher risk. And then finally, there's a lot of unique factors that protect somebody from taking their life. Let me share a story, and this kind of illustrates this point. Anybody ever heard of Catman?
No.
Probably haven't, but Catman was a prisoner. About 10 years ago was in prison on the East Coast. I can't remember which prison he was in. He wanted to take his life. He had given up. So a psychologist like myself that worked at the prison was assigned to Catman. We'll call him Joe. He wasn't known as Catman at that point. He was known as Joe, trying to save Joe's life because he was on suicide watch. He wanted to take it. So this psychologist worked with Joe for several months and was making no progress with Joe. Every time the psychologist would go in there, Joe said, I don't want to hear it. Just let me die. I want to take my life. And the psychologist said to Joe, I can't do that. My job is to keep you alive and save you. So this went on, and the psychologist was getting a bit depressed about Joe. Tried everything, nothing's working. And so one session, he went in there to work with Joe, and Joe said, you know what? I talked to my sister last night, and she told me about a cat that she had just bought. And it sounds like a neat cat. And the light bulb went off in the psychologist's head. Every once in a while that happens. And he said, Joe, if I could get you a cat, would you care for that cat? Joe thought a while and he said, yeah, I guess I would. That would be kind of neat. And so he got special permission, the psychologist did, from the warden, and they bought Joe a cat to care for in prison. And he hated people, but he loved this cat. So the psychologist came in one day and said, Joe, are you still thinking of killing yourself? And Joe said, heck no, who's going to care for my cat? So Joe became known as Catman. After Joe left the prison, he got 7 cats, bought 7 cats, and lived the rest of his life with cats that he cared for. He had a reason to live. He became known as Catman. Neat story, but that shows there's some unique thing in every person that gives them some hope or will to live. And when we give up hope or will to live, we die, don't we? Figurative and literally. So if we look hard enough at any client, we can find some reason they want to live. If we try hard enough or have the right people involved. All right. Substance abuse is key in both suicide and homicide. 25% of completers, that's a fourth, have had alcohol use problems. 64% have involved intoxication. So over half the people that kill themselves are intoxicated at the time. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Substance abuse in youth is a huge risk factor, and especially if they're impulsive to begin with and have a lot of behavioral outbursts. They call that conduct disorder. That's a bad recipe in youth. All right, as staff, where do you find out about suicide related to our clients?
And in our books are be located
Okay.
where our sites
Your
are
books,
at.
there is a form, Alvis House 211. It's an intake form, it's a packet. There's a section in there on mental health that caseworkers will go over with clients when they come in. It'll ask them, like, have you ever tried to kill yourself before? Have you ever been aggressive to others before? It talks a lot about suicide and homicide. Have you ever tried it? And that would be a good place to go to for information. There might be other reports in the chart. Where else would you find out information about suicide or homicide? Any ideas? How about each other? 3 shifts of staff in each facility. You'll have staff meetings every week. When you go to that and you're concerned about a client, bring their name up. You piece together what everybody's seen about that client. That's a good source of information. Ask the client directly. And it's okay to ask them directly, are you thinking about killing yourself or are you thinking about killing someone else? Do it in private, obviously. And what's the follow-up question? If I say, yeah, I'm thinking of killing myself.
Talk it on.
You got a plan, good, how are you going to do it? And the more detail I can give you, the more risk I'm in. Okay? Families. Get permission, get a signed consent, and call the person's family up, the client's family. They can give you good history. And then occasionally another client might tell you something that's important. Now, we can't solicit other clients' information because of HIPAA rules. But if a client comes to you and says, well, Joe's in trouble over there, I would at least investigate, right, what that client said to you. You can't involve that client, but you sure can follow up on leads, right? So these are all areas we can find out more about suicide and homicide if we think the client's in trouble. Don't forget, what is this? Remember I said this at the beginning of my talk, worry about the paperwork last, worry about the client's safety first, right? Make sure they're being supervised adequately. Make sure they don't have anything with them that they could hurt themselves with. Very important. We can't go back and save the client. And if you always remember to put this client's safety first, we'll never have to worry about making a decision that could cost a life. Let me say that again. If you always worry about the client's safety first, you'll never go back and have to make a decision that could cost the client their life. Let me give you an example. This truly happened. This was Lancaster, Ohio, south of Columbus, about 30 minutes. They had a counseling center called Fairfield Counseling Center. It no longer exists. What happened? About 10 years ago, a client went into the counselor's office and they had a pretty intense session. And the client said to the counselor, I want to kill my mother-in-law. She's a B. So the counselor wrote it all down. The client left the counselor's office and murdered his mother-in-law. The family of the mother-in-law proved that the counselor had this information prior to the murder. He didn't do anything with the information. The family sued the counseling center for $10 million and won. The counseling center went out of business. That could happen to Alvis if we don't follow our policy. Does that make sense?
Yes.
What should that counselor have done?
Had called.
Should have reported immediately to who?
The family?
The authorities, the police. And then would have taken the liability away from that clinic. But needs to report it immediately. It would have been better to go another step and warn the victim.
Yeah.
Call the potential victim and say, you know, so-and-so's got a plan, or I would be careful. But at the very least, you should have called the authorities immediately. And probably the counseling center would not have been successfully sued. And by the way, I don't want to scare anybody, but they could sue you as an individual, or they could sue Alvis House, or they could sue us both if ever we showed we were not following procedure. Your best protection is to follow procedure. You don't ever have to worry. That's why I say worry about safety first, worry about paperwork last. Any questions on that? No? Okay. Let's keep going. All right. Homicide and suicide, they both are like two sides of the same coin. Do you know what's similar with both?
Death.
Well, I can be well, you can be dead with both, right?
Yeah.
That's true. But I can be, as a client, usually people are suicidal and homicidal at the same time. Do you know that? If I'm in crisis enough to want to hurt myself, I could just as easily hurt you if you get in my way. Because I'm not thinking straight and I'm in crisis. So realize. And the other thing we already talked about is substance use. Most people that complete or kill themselves or someone else are under the influence. And we already know when people are under the influence or they're addicted, they make terrible decisions. Snapshot decisions, right? And I never understood, how could somebody kill somebody in road rage? I don't care how ticked you are with somebody that did something on the road. That's just beyond me, how you could kill somebody. But just think about when you get to know some of our clients with all their issues, and then they're drinking on top of that, people are pretty unstable or out of their minds sometimes. All right, I want to just briefly mention one study. This is a longitudinal study on violence in this country. The only one I know of happened in 2001. And what they did is they looked at mental illness, they looked at substance abuse, and they tried to figure out who's most at risk for violence in this country, both be perpetrators as well as victims. Interesting findings. Here's some of the things they found. In non-psychiatric or non-mental health populations, males are much more likely than females to engage in violent behavior. No surprise there, right? Males are more violent by nature. Individuals in their late teens and early 20s are the highest risk for violence and threatening behavior, whether or not they're mentally ill. So Alice has most of that population, don't we? Late teens, early 20s. Many of the men and women that come in are around that age. That seems to be the critical age for incidents to happen. But here's some interesting things that nobody thought they would find. Your best predictor of future violence is your history of past violence. Now, how do you know if a client is violent or not? I would never ask them, are you a violent person? What would our clients say?
No.
Not me. I'm not violent. So the best thing you could ask one of our clients to get at this information is, does anyone in your past complain about you when you get angry? Does anybody in your past complain about you when you get angry? And obviously if they've had a lot of that, it would suggest they're a violent person. And if they've had an act prior to age 12, it puts them in high risk to have a serious criminal record. So if I've been exposed to violence at a young age and acted out, I'm much more likely to have a criminal history later. What else did this is the take home from this whole study though. What does the media portray the mentally ill as? Perpetrators of violence, don't they? They go in and shoot people up.
Yep.
Because they're psychotic. But evidence does not support that. Evidence supports that the population we should be most scared of for violence in this country is not the mentally ill. It's those that use substances illegally. They're the ones that act out aggressively and violently. In fact, the mentally ill are more often victims of violence, not perpetrators. That's what the data shows. Yep, that's what the data shows. And they're 50 times more likely to be robbed from, 23 more times more likely to be raped, 18% more likely to be assaulted than somebody that does not have mental illness. So that's the takeaway from this study. Now, some people can have both mental illness and substance abuse problems, and that might make them, in fact, I think in the backgrounds of most of the national shooters that have killed people in schools, you know, they've gone in, Columbine and some of the other schools, I believe they had both serious substance abuse issues as well as mental health problems. So that probably is a double whammy, but it isn't the mental illness in itself that we have to worry about, it's the substance use. So that's interesting. All right, any questions about homicides in this country before we move on?
Too many of them?
Or with our clients? Just remember though, if you're working and you have somebody highly suicidal or highly homicidal, meaning they want to hurt somebody. Realize that they could act out, they could act in or they could act out. They could hurt themselves or they could hurt you. So always give yourself space. You'll learn the policy here in a little bit. It calls for getting them to emergency services immediately, which means most of the time we call the police and have the police deal with our clients when they're in that place. And as you as a staff, you're not responsible for stepping in. We don't at Alvis condone holds. So we're not going to put people in headlocks or holds or basket holds or any of that. Right? We redirect them and get the authorities to deal with them when they're in that place. That makes sense? Yes. And you'll learn the policy here in a minute. All right. So let's start talking about, one other thing I want to mention. Right hand to me and left. Hold on. Having a senior moment here. I wanted to share with you. Oh boy. Hopefully I'll think about it in a minute. But let's move on.
Excuse me. Yeah, you
Yeah.
mentioned that you cannot use basketball.
Correct. We teach, you'll get the training here. It's crisis training where you do blocking. If somebody's coming at you, then you learn redirection. But if it gets so out of hand that people are threatening, you're going to move everybody out of the way and you're going to call the authorities to deal with that person. That makes sense?
Yeah.
And that brings up a couple points I want to make. One is, if you call authorities about one of our clients, identify that you work at Alvis and what the situation is, because you want the authorities to know what they're dealing with. Another important thing is ask for a CIT officer to come. What's a CIT officer? It's a crisis intervention trained officer. They know how to deal with mental health, substance abuse, and other type of problems. Why is this so important? Let me illustrate. Maybe this was I think this is what I was thinking of telling you earlier. This happened to me. I had assessed a client, just got done assessing him about 2 months before this incident occurred. I wasn't there when this occurred, but here's what happened. He was a mental health client, and sometimes he refused to take his medications, and he would think paranoid thoughts. He was a paranoid schizophrenic. And what happened, this was around Christmas time 5 years ago. He started becoming verbally threatening with his staff. She locked herself in the bathroom and called the police. She should never have locked herself in the bathroom. That was not policy, but she did because she was scared. So the police came to the door. She didn't ask for a CIT officer. The police came to the door. We'll just call him George. And George was mentally ill, hallucinating, or having delusions. He thought the police were there to hurt him. So George picked up a kitchen knife. It wasn't even a sharp blade, but it was one of the kitchen knives, and swung it towards the officer. The officer was across the room. The officer said, "Drop your knife." And George says, "Like hell I'll drop my knife. You're going to hurt me." And the officer killed him. Because what officers trained to do, if someone has a weapon, you warn them once, and the next time you shoot them dead. You kill them. So George should not have ended up dead. It was a series of events that went wrong. The first event is the staff should never have locked herself in the closet or the bathroom. She should have run outside so she could have been there when the officer got there to explain the situation to the officer. 2, the staff should have asked for a CIT officer. That person would have handled that situation very differently.
But still, the officer was far away from him, so how can he shoot him?
Well, by the time, I think the officer probably was approaching George and said, "Drop your weapon." He didn't know what he was walking into, and that's how officers are trained, because their lives are on stake a lot. It's a voluntary? Voluntary.
Yep.
But there's enough of them to cover a lot of situations that happen.
But they don't get like incentives to do that training. It's like if they want to or not.
That's a great program, and there's a lot of officers. We've never had trouble getting CIT officers here, so it's a great program. But that's a good point. Yeah, it is voluntary. All right, so I just illustrate with that story that we can have bad situations, so it really pays for us to ask for a CIT officer. Okay? Now, 3 things we want to get into our policy. We're going to break up here in a minute. 3 things you need to be aware of. First of all, always err on the side of caution. Meaning if you're not sure what to do, I would put somebody on a suicide status. If you're not sure, if it's a gray area. We want to make sure we don't miss something and have somebody killing themselves, right? Number 2, don't ever ignore any suggestions of hurting self or others, even if it's for attention. You'll get to know some of your clients, and they're attention getters, right? But remember, they're high risk takers also, so always be careful. Err on the side of caution, and if they're suggesting they may want to hurt themselves, I'd at least put them on a suicide status. You can have the clinician decide when to take them off. You'll learn from the policy. That's not your decision to make, but your decision is to put them on. 3, always keep the client safe first, worry about the paperwork last. There you've heard it for the 5th time, but it's an important fact to know. If you do it that way, you'll never have a major problem. So err on the side of caution, don't ignore any suggestions that they're going to hurt themselves, and always worry about their safety first, okay? If in doubt, don't do nothing. Ask for help. Your supervisor's there at night to help you, or you can call the MOC, the manager on call. They can walk you through or put you in touch with a clinician, even at night. Let me make another point. It's riskier taking someone off a suicide status than placing them on. Because if you take them off prematurely, then something bad may happen. And third, when somebody's in crisis, like I said earlier, stay calm. The worst thing to do is get anxious or get intrusive where that person, it may push them off the edge. Okay? You're going to learn, whether you're in corrections or in DD, the policies are a bit different, but they share 3 common denominators. The first is if you have somebody that's potentially suicidal or homicidal, you get them to emergency services first. First step. 90% of the time they're going to be returned to your facility. And the second thing you want to do under the policy is put them on an action plan. It's a plan that's written out to protect them. It's called an action plan. That's the second step. And then the third step is you want to involve the clinician. There's a clinician like myself that has mental health training assigned to each facility. Get your clinician involved in the case. And then they'll decide how long the person's on and what all needs to be done. So 3 major steps you need to worry about. Get them to emergency services right away, and that's usually by calling a CIT officer. Second, have an action plan ready when they're returned from emergency services. And third, get your clinician involved. If you remember those 3 basic steps, you'll be well on your way to covering the policy. Any questions for me before we break up and go through the paperwork and some examples? Any questions? No? Good class. You either got it all or you're tired, or maybe both. Tired. Okay, we're going to go through some questions. Will tell me how close you read the policy and we'll fill in, but I want everybody to be on the same page. All right, can somebody tell me the difference between regular monitoring and alert monitoring if we have somebody suicidal or homicidal? If you put them on regular monitoring, what do you need to do?
So it's regular monitoring every 15 minutes,
Yep.
looking around? And
It's every 15 minutes you got to
Right.
check on them.
Right.
Or you can have, since you have a lot to do and you'll be busy in facility, you need to let them know to check back with you every 15 minutes, right?
That's
Right.
like the
And if
bathroom.
on regular, oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, the bathroom, they go alone and the staff
Okay, for
monitors
either
the door.
alert monitoring or regular monitoring, how do we deal if they have to go to the bathroom? Check and make sure nothing in there they could hurt themselves with or anything on them. Let them go in, give them their privacy, but you stay at where? Outside the door. And how often do you check on them verbally? Every 15 seconds or so. Hey, you okay in there? If they don't answer you, what do?
Go in.
You go in there. You violate their privacy. Let them know you're coming in. So that's either status you need to go through that routine. Because we want them to have their privacy, but only if they're safe. All right? If I'm on regular status, where do I sleep?
In your own area.
In my own area, after that area's been checked and my things have been checked through.
Yeah.
Now, we often have the question come up, well, what if something around that client, somebody around that client has something? we can't check through everybody's stuff. But if you're that worried about the client hurting themselves, they probably should be on alert monitor, not regular monitoring. If they sleep in their own bed, and how often are they checked on? Every 15 minutes, good. If I'm on alert monitoring, how often are you going to check on me? No. You just failed the course. How often?
Start over from the beginning of the day.
They should,
All the time.
they said they should stay in your sight.
Arm's length supervision. I'm in my sight at all times. How often are you going to chart on me? Every 15 minutes. So with alert monitoring, you got to supervise me constantly.
So in alert monitoring, I want you to be visually there, right?
You want me, actually, by policy, you should be within arm's reach. So you need them right with you. Now, why is that? Because if somebody is on that status, what does that mean?
That they're
If they're on alert monitoring, what does that mean?
Imminent risk. Of
Imminent risk. That means they either have a plan or they've already attempted it. Right? And it really reads if they've gestured or made an attempt. What's a gesture?
somewhat just speaking about what they want to do.
Where it even goes beyond farther than that.
They have a plan?
No, they've actually picked something up and threatened. A gesture is if I pick up a knife and say, I'm going to kill myself. I haven't done anything yet to myself, have I? But that's a gesture. Or if I pick up a gun and say, I'm going to shoot myself. I haven't done anything yet, that's a gesture. Now, if I actually shoot the gun, or I actually cut myself, that's an attempt. Anybody have any questions about that? So, policy reads if the gesture or an attempt, they should be on alert monitoring. I'd go as far as to say if you really think they have a detailed plan and they plan on doing it, I would still put them on alert. But that's not how the policy reads. But we want to protect somebody at all costs, right? All right, so if I'm on alert monitoring, I'm in arm's length supervision at all times during the day. At night, where do I sleep?
Somewhere inside.
Somewhere in sight. It's a designated area. Every facility will have a designated area, and you got to keep eyes on me at all times. How are you going to keep eyes on me at all times if you're single covered that night? Let me say somebody calls off. What do you do? And you got to make your rounds. You're responsible for making rounds around the
Take that
facility.
person with you?
You could.
Yeah.
What would be a smarter way to think this through?
Call the supervisor.
Good. You don't know what to do, call a supervisor. And what a supervisor will do is they'll magically produce a staff out of thin air, because they've got a magic wand, and
I'll
they'll
do my
transfer a
best.
staff from one facility over to your facility to help you. But great, if in doubt and you don't have what you need, please call a supervisor. They know what to do. All right, good. Any questions between the difference between regular monitoring and alert monitoring? So why do you put somebody on regular monitoring? Because they verbally threatened somebody or talked about hurting themselves. They haven't gestured or attempted yet. So that's regular monitoring. Who can put somebody on a suicide or homicide status?
Anyone.
Hmm?
Excuse me. Anyone can.
Anyone, good. You get a magic, you get the prize today. Anyone. Doesn't have to be a clinician, doesn't have to be a supervisor. If you're on duty and somebody makes a threat, you should put them on immediately. And then I'd alert somebody what's going on. What happens if somebody threatens to hurt somebody? Like one resident really has a plan to hurt someone, another resident or staff. What do?
Keep them distance.
Separate them. Separate the intended victim from the person. And then then you'll get the clinician or the managers involved, and maybe they'll need to move somebody. But keep them separated immediately, right? And once again, what happens if somebody has a plan outside the facility to hurt somebody?
Judgment call.
Alert authorities immediately and try to warn the intended victim. I would do both. Okay, good. Any questions about that? All right. Who can take somebody off of monitoring status? Well, it depends on if it's regular monitoring or alert monitoring. If it's regular monitoring, then it can be just the manager of the facility can do so. If it's alert, meaning they've tried or gestured, then it has to be 3 people, the clinician, the manager, and the MOC. Right? Remember, it's riskier taking somebody off than putting them on. That's why if it's been an alert, we have to have those 3 people agree that they're ready to come off. And I'll share in a few minutes what criteria we use to take somebody off. You won't have to make that decision, but you'll see what the criteria looks like. All right, when does a client go to emergency services? 4.
Attempted or threatened someone alcohol emergency.
Okay, if they threaten themselves or someone else, the first step, remember, there's 3 steps. You get them to emergency services right away. Ask for a CIT officer. Are you allowed to transport in your car? Well, the answer is yes, under certain conditions. If the client, you know them real well and you feel safe and they've calmed down, you could make that call. I still would talk to your supervisor. We can do that, but probably 90% of the time it'd be simpler just to have the police come and get them. But remember to let the police know you're from Alvis and what the situation is, so they're not walking in cold turkey. When they return from emergency services, what status are they on? I'm sorry? Nope. Maybe. No or maybe is the answer.
No.
How do you know what status to put somebody on when they come back? It's whatever they left on, they come back on. If they left on regular monitoring, they come back on regular monitoring. If they left on alert monitoring, they come back on alert. Then you get who involved? The clinician involved, and they'll make that determination, what status they need to be in. All right, who does the suicide homicide assessment? Good, the clinician. That's why we're going to involve them. But what do we need first in place when they come back from emergency services? We need an action plan in place. We'll go over one here in a minute. Who reads the action plan? All the staff do. Anybody that works with that client needs to read it and initial they've read it. All right? All right. 7, do clients leave the facility when they're on a suicide or homicide status? No. Whether you're on regular or alert, you do not leave the facility. Unless, the only exception is if a clinician releases somebody for an important appointment. But that's a clinician's call. All right? Do they get visitors? No, they would not get visitors unless, I think it's if on regular status they can have visitors, I think with the clinician agreeing to it, but if it's alert, they do not get visitors. If they're on alert we already talked about monitoring the restroom. Let me mention this. Obviously, if they're on either status, they're not going to work. What if a client's upset and says, I'm going to lose my job? You put me on the status, I can't do my job. How do we handle that? What are you responsible for as staff?
I'm responsible for keeping you safe.
I've got to keep you safe, but I'm also going to call your supervisor and let them know you're excused. Now, you don't obviously tell the supervisor they're on suicide status. They'll lose their job. But you can say, you're not lying, you can say they're sick today and can't come in. Right? So we could use that excuse for a couple days if we had to. And usually they're only going to be on suicide status a couple days. But please do that for them and let them know they're not going to lose their job. You got them covered. All right. If someone threatens homicide, when do you call the police? Immediately. Immediately. What's the most important thing to remember from this training? I've said it 6 or 7 times.
Safety.
Worry about the client safety first, the paperwork last. Now, you are responsible for the paperwork, but I'm more concerned that you followed safety protocol than I am that you missed something on the paperwork. We're going to go through the paperwork now so you'll understand it. But remember, safety always comes first. Make sure that client's safe and getting cared for before you worry about is all the paperwork been filled out. All right? All right, now take the other packet. There should be, after the policy, there should be a packet that has a scenario number 3 on it. You guys find that? I want to go through the pieces of paperwork as an example for you. We're going to find scenario 3 client, Joe Smith. Can you find that?
Is it there? It's after the second.
Yep, there it is. You guys find it? Client Joe Smith, scenario 3, you find it? It should be after the policy.
Fifth section.
to the policy. It should be there, the scenario. There you go. Everybody there? Okay. Let's go through this. Client Joe Smith's been cutting on his arm with a piece of glass. He says it makes him feel better. Upon questioning, he tells you he's been worrying about several things recently, like what his life's going to be like when he leaves Alvis. He's having cravings for crack cocaine, and he's been thinking about being abused in the past by his father. What status are you going to put him on? Alert. Why?
Because he already cut himself.
He already cut himself. What's the first thing you want to do?
There are people who cut themselves and don't want to
What's
kill
that?
themselves. I said there are people who cut themselves and don't want to kill themselves. I agree he puts on alert status.
Yeah,
but
we can't make that call
Right,
whether
yeah.
it's, remember, because he could still kill himself, he's
Right.
trying to get attention. So, and he may not be doing it for attention. Some cutters do it because it makes them feel better.
Right.
But we're not going to worry about that. We're going to worry about just getting him help. So by policy, we have to get him to emergency services, and common sense is not so common. We want to make sure we take the glass away from him. Figure out where he got that glass from, right? How can you keep Joe safe?
Follow all the procedures.
I'm sorry?
Just follow all the procedures.
Follow the procedure, keep your eye on him, right? Until emergency services gets there. That's common sense too. But obviously, we know he's already made an attempt. And get the glass away from him. All right, what's the action plan look like? Let's say he's been returned to our facility. Remember, you have to have an action plan in place. This is an example of one. For the action plan, we are going to summarize the situation for all staff to read. Why is Joe on a suicide status, on alert? Look, alert gets checked on top. Number one, we're going to summarize the situation. I won't reread it, but it's very similar to what we just read. Number two, what precautions are we going to put in place to promote Joe's safety? Number one, we're going to call the clinician lead and let her evaluate Joe. Second, we're going to call Joe's psychiatrist, because if you look further, you're going to find out that he's been on mental health medications, to try to set up an appointment to evaluate his meds. We're going to keep sharp objects away from Joe. Why? No, he already cut himself with one. Right? 4, we're going to allow Joe to call his mother. Why? Because we know he's got a good relationship with his mother. 4, we're going to discourage him from calling his girlfriend, because if you look at the situation, I didn't mention it, but he's been arguing a lot with his girlfriend. And then we're going to let others know about Joe's supervision and have everybody initial the action plan. You can put whatever you want under number 2, but it's anything we can use to promote Joe being safe while he's under the supervision. So every situation is going to look a bit different. Number 3 on the action plan. What are we going to restrict Joe from? Well, most guys are involved in a lot of groups, right? But if Joe's got an alert status, we're probably not going to want him to go to his normal groups, right? Right, because we don't want him around other people. He's been highly upset. Second, we should not allow him to talk to his dad. Why? Because we know his dad's abused him in the past. It just upsets Joe. Joe shouldn't go to his job by policy, right? And then finally, Joe shall have no visitors unless the clinician approves it, per policy. But actually, I realize that that's probably a mistake, because if you read closely in the policy, if you're on alert, you don't get any visitors. So there probably shouldn't be no visitors.
Would
Yes.
you take their phone on alert status? I mean, it's the only way to control calls from his father.
Yep,
But, I
if
mean,
you got a good reason to take it, make sure you put that under restrictions.
Got
Taking
it.
Joe's cell phone because of ABC. You can put anything under number 3. You probably will not be the one filling this out. It'll be the clinician and the supervisor, but you can give them your input. I would say, yeah, if you think him using his cell phone increases risk for him, that's a good reason to take it.
So we're okay to just take it if he's arguing with his girlfriend and his dad?
Yeah, as long as it's written down in policy in the protection plan for him, and there's a reasoning there. Now, let me state this. Anything you restrict a client from, who do you need to call? Yeah, but after you call the clinician, make sure that the PO gets called, the probation officer. Probation officers get PO'd if they're not informed of restrictions to a client. So make sure somebody follows up with the PO, okay? How long are they on these restrictions? Until the clinician releases them from the status. And usually, let me just state this, usually it's only a day or two at the most. And then they're feeling better or something's changed and we can take them off. And sometimes it's only several hours. But I think the longest somebody's been on has been a week, but that was unusual. Usually it's a couple days. But within that window, if we're not getting them help, they could take their lives or somebody else's. All right, directives to staff, number 4. Call Joe's job site and let them know he won't be to work due to illness. Contact Joe's PO to explain the situation and restrictions. Number 3, call Joe's mother. Why? She's a good support for him. Let her know about Joe's situation and follow up with Joe's psychiatrist. And you can see the clinician signed it, the director signed it, you guys all initialed it on the bottom. Everybody that works with Joe. Any questions about the action plan? It's basically a plan followed by everyone working with Joe until he's let off of the suicide monitoring, and then he goes back to normal restrictive measures, whatever those are. As you'll learn, every client that's under probation has a specific plan that has to be followed. It's kind of common sense stuff, but this is above and beyond. All right, question? I'm sorry?
Oh,
Go ahead.
fine. So if they're on alert monitoring and you feel that it's time for them, I know it's like not our call, it'd be the clinician and the manager and whatnot, to take them off that alert, do they drop them down to regular monitoring after that, or do they just drop them off?
Great. You're a smart dude. Yes, no, it's up to the clinician. They could choose, if they still think there's some risk, they could, as precaution, they could drop them down, step them down to regular monitoring before taking them off, or they could just take them off. It just depends on the conditions of the event. We'll go over those in a minute. But great question. Anybody else have a question? All right, turn to the next page, the suicide homicide observation form. Remember the 15-minute checks we've been discussing? Here's what the form looks like. Notice at 9 o'clock, we started charting on Joe. Why did we choose 9 o'clock to start charting? That's good. That's when he came back from emergency services. So 9 o'clock, whoever the staff JC was, they put their initials on the form and what Joe was doing at the moment. He was sitting. His living room of behavior. The answer is no, that's a place. So don't put where they are, put what they're doing. Sitting, sleeping, talking, eating. Action words, right? You can put where they are if you want to, but you don't have to, just what they're doing. If you're observing Joe and he's doing something unusual or maybe a safety risk behavior, so it's maybe we found him with a knife or we found him with a piece of glass, you're going to want to turn over, so go to the next page, on page 2, and you're going to write the time and what you observed Joe doing. So you got places on the back of the form to document unusual incidents. Here at 10:45, Joe was observed with a sharp object, a stick, next to his bed. He said he didn't know where it came from. All right? So we're going to mark that, chart that on the back. And you notice on the bottom, everybody's name is spelled out in print form, and their initials are put down. Please print your name. If you're anything like me, you'll never be able to read the signature. Simply, I've been really accused of that, and it's true. I have terrible handwriting, so print. Any questions for this form? The action plan. Or, I'm sorry, the monitoring tool. Right? Either of those forms. No? Okay, the last thing I wanted to mention. Remember I told you that the clinician, director, and MOC, if it is an alert status, would take them off, and if it's a regular status, the manager would. There's 4 criteria that need to be met. You don't have to make this decision, but I wanted to see what justifies taking someone off. The next page. Number 1, the clinicians re-administer a suicide homicide tool and has no concerns. Number 2, the action plan was followed. Number 3, the residents not verbalizing any wish to harm themselves or someone else, and they're showing no signs of acting out. And number 4, the resident gives reasons to live and not harm themselves or others. If those 4 criteria have been met, the clinician or whoever will take them off. And then we're back to normal functioning. Where does the paperwork all go then? Goes to with the case manager to the file, and the case manager should send a copy over to myself or whoever the clinician is. Yes, sir.
Just a thought, take a step back for a minute. You said notify the PO.
Yep.
Are you saying find out their specific PO, or if, like, say it's a PRC client, would we call the APA?
I call the APA and let
Just
them
call
know,
it
yeah.
the APA general? Okay.
Or there might be a place to just send information to. I think with that kind of designation, there's something you could fax or send.
Got it.
Yeah. Just so they're aware that there was an issue and that we've monitored them especially. Yeah. All right, great. Any questions about the paperwork? Now, where do you find the paperwork? 2 places. One is there's a binder in every facility that says, I think, suicide homicide policy and procedure. It will have all these forms in it. So it's a hard copy. Also, you can go on the Z drive. Okay? And the Z drive has these folders in a form under clinical services. So you can either do it online, you know, or you can do it the old-fashioned way and use hard copies. The reason we like the hard copies is sometimes things get crazy in the facility. You don't have time to sit down and get on the computer. Then you can grab hard copies on a clipboard and run with it. So that's sometimes easier. Any questions for me? So remember, worry about the client safety first, paperwork last. If you don't know what to do, what do? Ask for help. MOC is a great place to do that, or the shift supervisor at night. Stay calm. If you don't have what you need, ask for help. There's always somebody that can be pulled to help you. Every once in a while we get in a funky situation where a larger facility only has 1 person working because 2 people called off. Shouldn't happen, but it does occasionally. In that situation, if you're ever this is even beyond suicide. If you don't have what you need to get the job done, ask for help. People are good about transferring folks over to help you. All right, any questions before I'm done? Nope?